What are the different ways to tell a story? You can use words, but you can also use puppets, or instrumental music can tell a story. Dance and movement can tell a story.
Please welcome back to the Blind Ability Studio, Christine Malec.
For me, Luminato this year is very much about this idea of the art of storytelling and how we do that.
The third annual Luminato Festival. Audio describe, ultimate description, inclusiveness at its best.
It's an audio-only experience of the festival, and it's geared toward a blind and low vision community, but it's really valuable for anyone who just wants an audio-only experience.
Filling us in depth on the Luminato Festival and all that the festival has to offer.
So the festival starts on June 7th through the 18th.
Now please welcome Christine Malec. Hope you enjoy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've never heard of anyone doing quite this level of engagement, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm so fortunate to be part of producing it.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson. Returning to the studio is Christine Malec, and she is here to talk about, once again, about the Luminato Festival. Christine, welcome back.
Thank you. Always great to be here. Yeah, it's that time of year again. I know that you and I have talked about this before, and I love to talk about this on your podcast particularly because there's so much opportunity in the work that I've been doing for a blind audience and for an audio-only experience. So I'll take kind of a step back and talk about the Luminato Festival itself. So I'm based in Toronto, and the Luminato Toronto Festival has been going on for many years. And it is a 10-day long arts and culture festival that hosts all kinds of different events around the city that are arts-based. So the typical stuff like plays and concerts, and then they sort of diverge out into other a little more fringy stuff too. And about 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, and I give them credit for this because this was pre-pandemic, they really wanted to up their game around accessibility and inclusion. And of course, as we've seen during the pandemic, this has been a huge and important trend in the arts. But Luminato was looking at it closely, very closely before the pandemic. So I give them a little thumbs up for that. And what they started with was an access advisory committee. So this was a group of people from various disability communities to consult with the organization about how to make their content and their organization more inclusive. And so you would get things like, we need more ASL interpreted shows. We need more audio described shows. We need to have accessibility of the venue be considered for people who have mobility impairments. But it also got to include, why aren't there more disabled artists represented on stage? And, why is there not more disability representation in the staff? So it was a really sweeping approach that they took to accessibility and inclusion. And during the pandemic, one of the things that as we stopped being able to get together, we came up with this idea of Radio Lumi. And so what that is it's an audio-only experience of the festival. And it's geared toward a blind and low vision community, but it's really valuable for anyone who just wants an audio-only experience because, as we know right here, podcasting, audio-only stuff has become more popular in the wider community as well. So what Luminato has done is to put together each day of the festival has a corresponding day of audio-only programming that's accessible online to listen to. And so the sorts of things that you get, there's some great added value content. So you get artist interviews and interviews with the producers that are uniquely from a blindness perspective. So it's not the conventional interview that you get, but you get an interview that asks questions like, okay, give me a visual description of that, or how might a blind person interpret this or that thing? And so for each day of the festival, and in the show notes, there'll be lots of references for how to access this stuff. So the festival starts on June 7th through the 18th. And on each day of the festival, on the evenings of the weekdays, and then during the day on the weekend, there's audio-only programming, and there's 3 blind or low vision lead hosts. So myself, Ramya Amuthan from Accessible Media Incorporated, and Theodore Walker Robinson, who's a member of the Blind and Low Vision Arts community in Toronto. So we are the sort of lead hosts who get to guide the conversation. And then the other guests are audio describers. So JJ Hunt and Rebecca Singh, and they head out on location. So a lot of this stuff that's happening is in communities like downtown, live events. So we get to kind of have a describer on site, and they talk about what's going on in the various live performance venues. And we get to just ask them questions and expand on this. So what about that? Or even a bit of people watching, which is one of my favorites. The other really exciting thing for me, and this is new this year, at the end of last year when we were talking about how can we reach a wider audience, one of the things that I think is really relevant is how can we increase arts literacy in the blind and low vision community? And here's what I mean by that. Especially if you grew up being blind or low vision, a lot of the arts don't feel approachable. They don't feel as accessible. And I mean that with a small a, like a lowercase a, just sort of available or relevant. And it's harder to kind of process, why would I care about that? And so, for example, I think that if you're sighted and you're walking around your community and you're downtown, whatever, and you see billboards or you see posters or whatever for, say, the art gallery or the museum or the latest performance at the dance theater, or you have like a visual vocabulary of the arts, at least, even if you're not that interested, you have in your mind this sort of language, this visual language of what the arts means, even to someone who's not really paying close attention. And it's easier for you to access that material. And to, even if say you're not a dancer, say you're not that interested, but you see a poster for ballet and you might stop and stare at it for a while and think to yourself and process, why would I care about that? And then maybe you'd process a bit more and you'd see something more subtle in the image and think, oh, there's this element, there's that element. I wonder about this other thing. So much of the ways that the general community engages with arts starts with visual and can expand from that. And I think that even when we started to get more audio described artistic content, there wasn't as big of an uptake in the blind community as I expected. And I don't mean like TV or movies, but I mean plays or dance performances. There wasn't as much of an uptake as you might have expected. And my theory about it is that as a community, we don't have the literacy. We don't really understand, why is this relevant? What is in this for me? So the idea that came out of this was, what if we had a podcast series that was released before the festival to talk about not specifically what's coming up in the festival, but more in general terms, the art forms that will be featured, especially ones that are a bit obscure for blind and low vision folk, and expanded on them and talked to audio describers and talked to creators from a blindness perspective to say, why is this relevant? How does this work? What's going on in this art form? How is it done? Why does it matter? And I think that arts literacy is always a good thing for people to be thinking about, and it's a useful conversation to have, but especially for the blind and low vision community, I think that these kind of conversations are informative and engaging. They're meant to be engaging. So my parts, there's 7 episodes in this series released at the end of May, early June. And the 2 episodes I worked on were dance and puppetry. So I've been getting this big crash course on these 2 disciplines that are highly visual and, to me, pretty abstract. And so I've been having a really a real kind of not just intellectual, but a real intellectual journey around how to make sense of these disciplines and how relevant can they be to someone who's blind and low vision. So the overarching theme of all of these podcasts is the art of storytelling, because art is most often about telling a story. So in this work and in other work I've been doing too, my interest is, how do you tell the same story in different media? So here's a really simple example. Cinderella. It's a story. We all know it. It was written. It's been told in movie form. There have been plays. There's ballet. There's a dance version of this story with no words at all. One of the overarching themes for me in these 7 podcast series that's sort of predating the festival is, how can we tell the same story in different media? This question is becoming endlessly interesting to me for a lot of reasons, but I think it's especially relevant for the blind and low vision community.
When you were talking about the information, that the language that they're receiving visually, that is so important because it's a whole, almost a unconscious understanding of something. Even though you're not paying the closest attention, you're glancing, you're taking it in, you're absorbing something. And when you talked about the puppetry, do they go behind the scenes of what the puppetry is like?
Yeah, so one of the great things I got to do was interview a puppeteer and an audio describer in the same conversation. So I could say to the puppeteer, okay, give me 3 examples of different kinds of puppets. So there's hand puppets, there's marionettes, there's shadow puppetry, there's all kinds. So she would sort of say, okay, well, there's this and there's that. And then the audio describer would say, well, here's what that looks like. If the puppeteer was not too accustomed to giving verbal descriptions for blind people, then the audio describer can step in and say, and here's the effect. Here's what it looks like to someone who's watching it. And I think that, what you said about the ways in which some of this stuff is so common that sighted people, they just get it. And puppetry is one of these for me, because one of the reasons we're talking about puppetry is that one of the elements of Luminato this year is a giant puppet named Little Amal. And Little Amal is a Syrian refugee child who's lost her parents. And so Little Amal is this enormous, like up on stilts puppet, and she's walking around Toronto. There's several scheduled sort of places where Little Amal will be, whatever being means for a puppet. And there's some level of interaction. And this puppet has been in many big cities and sort of welcomed by the mayor. And this is absolutely bizarre to me. And I don't get how, to me, puppetry is sort of a bit creepy and foreign and a bit like playful or kid-like or a little surrealistic. So to me, how do you take something like puppetry and transpose onto it this really serious story about a lost girl who's a refugee who's lost her parents? Like, that's heavy. That's really heavy stuff. So in the setup, in these sort of 7 podcast series, I get to talk to a puppeteer about some of the mechanics and some of the ways that people respond and some of the ways that a puppeteer brings life to an inanimate thing, to a puppet. But then during the festival, a lot of our airtime is going to be with the audio describers on site where Little Amal is doing whatever Little Amal will be doing in a crowd and in public. And I just cannot yet, because it hasn't happened yet, I cannot figure out how, what to me, like puppetry is a bit absurdist, mostly because I just don't understand it. But how does the art form like puppetry meld with something so serious as this theme? And then the other layer, of course, is that Toronto is an extremely multicultural city, and there are guaranteed to be people in the audience or just walking by who have had experiences like Little Amal of being a refugee. So this is one of those things where when I talked to the puppeteer or other people informally, like not in an interview context, I try to get at, how does this work? How does this weird paradoxical thing happen of something frivolous and something so tragic overlap? And they all had trouble articulating it. And they were all really interested in the question, but they could not quite find the words for it. And so when you talk about it being a language, like a set of understood truths that maybe are never put into words that you have when you're sighted. This is, to me, the classic example, which, let's talk again at the end of June and maybe I'll have more insights. But as a blind person, I have no idea how this frivolous seeming, because I'm not knowledgeable, this art form, how it's going to deal with something so intense as the refugee experience. How do those things come together? And when I talk to people, they don't have words. Like, they don't seem puzzled. Sighted people, when I ask this question, they don't seem puzzled that it's true, they seem puzzled about how to articulate it, how to explain to me that it just works. And so I am looking forward to the time when there's an audio describer on scene, watching the crowd, watching little Amal, watching the puppeteers, watching how people react. And I just get to ask questions from a blindness perspective. And this to me is the beauty of what the festival is doing, because if I was there with a friend, say even the most well-meaning friend, they might not be able to find the words that an audio describer can find to help me understand how the crowd's reacting or what's actually going on. And so this is the beauty of what Luminato is doing, is that as a blind person, I get to ask the right people who know how to answer these questions from a blindness perspective. I get to ask the questions that people in the blind community want to know, or even the questions we don't know that we have. We get to ask the experts and get answers that are tailored for people who can't see. And so that's why puppetry is part of this. But I feel like that's true for dance as well, is that it's very hard to put these concepts into words because they start out as being so visual.
But with the right audio description, it kind of paints the canvas that the sighted are taking in and weaves it into the words that you're hearing, so you can gather more understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, and this is the thing, is that this kind of audio description, audio description is evolving. It's innovating, and there's new things going on in the field. And this is, to me, some of the innovation, because when you get audio description in movies and TV, it's very prescribed. You have a set amount of time. You have to fit your description in there, and the quality is judged by how succinct you are, the things you choose to fit in there, how well you express them, how clear the narrator's voice is. So we understand what quality means in that context. But in this context, you get to expand on that. And the sort of hallmark of good description is describe what you see. That makes sense. When you're describing a movie or a TV show, we want to know what the viewer is seeing. When you're talking about puppetry or dance, there's more wiggle room, and there's almost a need for more of that. And this is also true in visual art. It's conversation that I've had with many people about visual art. Should a describer just describe what they see, or should the blind consumer of the description get a bit more? Like, okay, so that's what you see, but how does it make you feel? Because it's not necessarily a describer. It's often absolutely not the describer's role to say, and this is how it makes me feel. However, when you're getting into art like visual art or dance or puppetry, I think there's a space for knowing what the emotional resonance is, especially for dance. If you just describe what you see in a dance performance, it's kind of like an exercise class, right? It becomes just a sort of lesson in anatomy and move this limb that way and that limb this way. And that's not what dance is. It's so much more than that. So in conversations with other blind people about visual art, the overwhelming sense is, yes, tell me what you see, then tell me what it evokes for you, because it is a language. Like, the visual world is a language. And so, okay, I see a man walking down the street. Well, that's pretty straightforward. But I see a dancer conveying this complex thing. It's a language that I don't know. I feel as a blind person, I need more context or more reaction. So I haven't talked to a lot of blind people about this in terms of dance, but definitely in visual art, people seem to want, tell me what you see, then tell me what it evokes. What's the mood? And there's been some really fun art projects about this. Vocal Eye in Vancouver did this project where they had street art, and they invited, kind of like a crowdsourced thing. They'd say, okay, all the sighted people who want to submit your own descriptions of this. So they would have one art piece and, 10 descriptions by different people. And you can't help but get different perspectives on it. And I think that when it comes to visual art forms like dance and puppetry, that's where audio description can get really innovative and experimental to try and convey that language that we don't have as blind people, particularly if you were born blind or low vision.
To the depths of receiving the information of audio description, so you too can get your own perspective. Does that make sense?
Yes. This is something I tussle with in dance. It's something I've been deep diving into for a couple of months, and I'm still very much learning some language and some thoughts. And I ask myself, even with the best audio description, will I ever appreciate dance truly as a spectator. And here's an example of where I thought, I don't know. I don't know. So I got the chance to interview Laurence Lemieux, who is staging Nuit, which is one of the dance performances at Luminato that will be audio described. So Laurence is the choreographer for this piece. And I asked her, when you're watching dance, how do you know when someone gets it right? And here's what she said. As an example, we're in the very early stages of rehearsal for this piece. People don't know their roles all that well. The dancer was sweaty and out of breath and exhausted. And for about 30 seconds, the dancer just expressed the feeling so clearly that I had tears in my eyes. That's what Laurent said. And I was completely floored because I often get that response in myself to music or to story. It had never crossed my mind that someone could be moved to tears by watching dance. That was an absolutely foreign concept to me. And I've just been talking to everybody about this because I want to understand it better. And what I really want to know is, could that ever happen to me? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no. So I have a sighted friend. She's not a dancer, but she likes to watch dance. And she said, yes, that's happened to me. So it's not just someone who's a dancer and knows the language intimately. You know, your average sighted person can have that emotional response too. And I just think about this a lot, and I don't think that could happen to me. I think the only way that that might happen is if the audio describer was so immersed that their words and their tone conveyed the feeling, the emotion. And even that is something I still tussle with. How can movement evoke emotion? How can movement convey emotion? So I know how to do that with words as a writer. I think I know how to do that with voice as a singer or a storyteller. But just by the way I move my body, I could convey emotion. That's a very foreign concept to me. And part of it, as I think more about it, is the language of the body, which body language. So just the ways that everyday movement conveys feelings. And even if you've never had sight, we all know that our posture, our way of holding ourselves conveys things. We know that this is true. There's body language. Our bodies say things about how we're feeling. But there's such a language of it. And it's a language that we may, as blind people, learn to speak, but it will always come to us secondhand. So can that language ever be so moving that it might move us to tears by the way that a story or a song would? At this point, I'm thinking no, but maybe I'll learn differently.
I mean, this is really deep. I never took audio description to this level, but it makes sense that, you know, the combination of all the elements that are there, and someone who's visually impaired would be getting the audio description, that if they could be so keen, so into it that it can convey it. So you leave with that feeling, or you get that feeling as they do it. That's the whole mission of audio description.
Well, and it's kind of the mission of art too, right? Is to evoke emotion.
Yeah.
I had a really interesting experience. So because when I get interested in a thing, I take that thing and I bring it into all my work. So being preoccupied by dance, I also run a group for the CNIB, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, and it's called the Curiosity Club. Every 2 weeks, it's an ongoing learning group for blind adults. And luckily for me, I met a ballet teacher, and I said, hey, would you be interested in presenting to my group of blind people? And she's a teacher. She was really interested to do it. So here's what happened. We had like 90 minutes of different kinds of movement and a few ballet postures. And yeah, it's really interesting. Oh, this is cool. Then at the end, she showed us how to do something that she called the révérence, which is sort of like the thank you, which is a bit related like the bow that a performer would do at the end of the show. So I'm going to describe how it's done because it's really sweet, and something really interesting happened to me when I did it. It's what you would do at the end of a show. You put your right hand on your heart, which communicates from my heart. Then you extend your hand palm up toward the audience, the other person, which is saying, I give to you. Then you bring your hands over your head and circle them around each other, which apparently means dance. So from my heart, I give to you this dance. And then you put one foot behind the other and you bend your knees and you open your palms upward as if to say, thank you for sharing this with me. So from my heart to you, I give this dance Thank you for sharing it with me. And when I did that, I actually felt something. And that was the first time I'd ever had that experience of using my body outside of like intimacy, using my body to communicate emotion without words. And it worked. Like I felt something. And so I think there's also an element of experience in there so that if I took more dance classes, then maybe the whole thing would make more sense to me. That if I heard an audio describer describing a dance performance, then maybe what they say would have more resonance in me. So there's a blind dance teacher in New York, Krishna Washburn, and she teaches ballet. Her website is called Dark Room Ballet, and she teaches ballet to blind people as a blind person. And that in itself, that's whole podcast worthy right there. That's really interesting. But she talks about mirror neurons. And this is a concept in neurology where when a sighted person sees someone smile, they can't help but smile just a little bit. And there's this mirror neuron thing where it's empathy. It's an empathy-based response where when you see an emotion, your mind kind of echoes it in this mirror way. So Krishna talks about mirror neurons in dance. And I think that if I learned to dance, I might understand dance better as a spectator. But it was an extraordinary moment. So when I did this reverence, part of it was that she told me what the gestures meant and they made sense. Like, yeah, I hold my hand over my heart. I do that sometimes just to indicate I really feel that. Or you hold your palm out, like welcoming, like here, I'm giving you something. So those gestures kind of made sense. And when I put them all together and did this flowy thing, I actually felt something. It was really sweet. I actually got a tiny speck of insight. And so I guess the point of that whole long story is to say that there's a lot of different ways for arts literacy to happen. And there's lots of different ways to understand art. And for blind people, maybe some of them are different from what the sighted world might use. And embodiment ends up, I think, being part of how some of that learning can happen.
While you were talking there, I was thinking about a situation that could happen where I would feel or look to convey something. It's like when someone hands you a newborn infant, like to hold, and you put your hands out and it's like, oh my gosh, this is, you don't know if you haven't held a baby before, that feeling of unknowing. So when you said the palm up, I was over here doing palms up. And I remembered someone hand me an infant for the first time to actually carry, to hold. And it was like that empty feeling of, okay, really like nervous.
Yes. Yeah.
Delicate and just all that stuff. How would someone convey that to someone? And it's such an art. I think what you're really saying is we've come a long ways with audio description in just a few years here. And it's just so great to be part of it, to hear it like J.J. Hunt. And when he does his descriptions, when you guys do this, the stars, the universe, describing pictures, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. The field is really, really innovative. And there's movements too towards more somatic, like more body related thing. In talking with one of the other describers, Rebecca Singh, she does a lot of dance, and she talked about a sort of experimental approach where in a dance performance, you have a choice of a few different tracks that you can be listening to. And one of them will be the straight up audio description with words. Others of them might be sounds that are mimicking what the body is doing, or tones that might be just following the arms up and down and sideways. And there's a technique, I forget what it's called, but for fireworks, where a describer will stand behind the blind person and draw the fireworks on your back. Instead of trying to use words, they're using the body and your tactile sensation. So it's much faster. It's much more efficient than using words. And they can add words like, oh, that's blue and that one's green and that one fizzled out. But if you draw on someone's body, that's another way that description can happen. And I just love that the field is so innovative and experimental. So of course we love what we get on, Netflix and Amazon and stuff, that the TV and movies are done. And there's all of this other ways and other contexts where art is sort of trying to incorporate some of this. So another way is that some theater pieces are written with embedded description, and there's some blind artists and non-visually impaired artists as well working on this. So for example, a character might be walking across the stage and someone might say, careful that your long dress doesn't get caught in the whatever, and just little ways of embedding description into the art itself. And that's not appropriate all the time, but it's just to show that there's all of these innovative ways that description is happening and turning up all over. One of my favorites, oh, I love this, is I'm on the social platform Mastodon, which many blind people have moved to because Twitter has become so much less friendly. And one of the hallmarks, one of the things about Mastodon is alt text is the norm. It's kind of expected. And there are sighted people who won't boost, like who won't repost a post unless it has alt text for the image. Like it's the bar is high. The bar is high. And so what you get are people posting images, and it's amazing to be part of the public conversation in this way. So some of them, oh my gosh, like people who are into birding, they love writing image descriptions, and they're like really elaborate. People post comics or cartoons or just pictures of their cat. So this expansion of audio description into image description and alt text, so there's so many more venues for it as well. And it's really, really heartening to see that in the mainstream community, where people have no obligation or particular reason to do it, they just want to be inclusive. And you see the blind people love it. They're posting saying, thank you for the alt text. We really love it. And here's how to do it really well. And it's making us part of it. And so there's lots of gratitude. There's lots of people stepping up to make the space on Mastodon more inclusive. So I think it just raises the bar everywhere for organizations to be offering that too. Yeah, JJ and I are still doing work with Chandra and NASA to get their images described, and some of them sonified. As I'm fond of saying, there's never been a better time to be blind.
That's true. We've been mostly talking about the dance and the puppetry and the visual part of it, but there's 7 podcasts that you have coming out to help the literacy of arts for the blind community. What are some of the other areas?
Interestingly, one of the things that's happening in this podcast series has to do with Indigenous perspectives. And so in Canada, I think in the United States, you refer to Native people, and in Canada, the word phrasing we use is Indigenous people, so the First Peoples. And some of the content in the podcasts, it's not specifically disability related, but it's kind of taking an Indigenous perspective on the arts and inclusion. So each podcast, the first 15 minutes is the easiest way to say it is an extended land acknowledgement. So I'm not sure if these are common in the US, but in Canada, it's pretty common to have what we call a land acknowledgement. So for example, if you're at a public performance, the MC at the beginning might say, I'd like to acknowledge that this land was the traditional lands of, and they talk about the first peoples who were there. And this was something that we implemented in Canada. It's not a law, it's not official in any way, but we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that went on for several years and resulted in several recommendations coming from the Indigenous community of ways to start to address some of the inequities and tragic history of the relationships. And so one of the first things was just acknowledge. Just say, at least, at minimum, just make an acknowledgement that this land wasn't always the property of white European people. So the land acknowledgement has become somewhat common in Canada. And what Luminato is trying to do is to move beyond the land acknowledgement, because the land acknowledgement was always meant to be a first step. And what Luminato is doing in these podcasts particularly is to make that a bigger part of our perspective. And so the first 15 minutes of each podcast have been produced by one of Luminato's producers, Dev Ramsuak, and it contains some interviews with Indigenous artists talking about how an Indigenous perspective would approach issues in a way that's different from the way that a colonial approach might work. So some examples are, one of the artists says, I was always told I had to choose to be an actor or a dancer or a musician. And in Indigenous communities, we just don't make distinctions in those ways. You're a creator, and we don't need to say you're this kind of creator or that kind of creator. Some other tie-ins that happen are around how Indigenous communities care for each other, or how the overlaps between Indigenous experience and the experience of the disability community when it comes to being marginalized in society. So the first 15 minutes of each of the podcasts is devoted to this kind of shift in perspective. And so each podcast is divided into 3 parts. So parts 2 and 3 are the visually impaired lead hosts doing interviews and having conversations about arts literacy. And the first 15 minutes is doing some dives into Indigenous perspectives and some pretty creative approaches to how that's done, and hearing the voices of Indigenous artists to broaden the sense of what art means and how we can decolonialize our thinking. So that's a really big phrase that when I first heard it, I went, I don't know what that means at all. And here's a great example of what it means. Part of last year's Luminato was a music festival that was, I think they called it Toronto Music by Night or something like that. And so when they thought about the title, they changed the title to Guided by Starlight. And it was an allusion to the idea that Indigenous people tended to use the stars as a means of navigating. So the first 15 minutes of each of these podcasts get kind of academic in a way that's really educational, but you get these nuggets of insight, like, oh, when people talk about how to decolonialize my language, like how to take our Western culture in North America and make it more inclusive of an Indigenous perspective, that's an example. Like, what if you retitled your event Guided by Starlight? That's a title that has more ideas in it. It has different perspectives. So all of these podcasts, each of these 7 podcasts has that component as well. And so trying to sort of carry over ideas from Indigenous culture into our culture and make us all a bit, give us all a bit of a broader perspective. So all of these podcasts are meant to sort of set up components of the festival. So one of the episodes is about archives and storytelling and how do we tell stories? How do we create stories in our minds? What stories do we think are important? What's the difference between telling a story as a written book, an audiobook, a play, a story that you might tell at a party? So they're all kind of about story and how we make stories out of everything. Like if you imagine yourself at a party, the whole night is people telling each other stories, unless you're arguing about politics or something. But mostly it's people saying, oh yeah, and then remember when we went to the Who concert back in whatever, or yeah, when I went to see Taylor Swift, this is what happened. And so when we get together, that's what we do, is we tell each other stories about our lives and our experiences. And hopefully you're funny or insightful, or you can tell a story in a good way that engages people. But really, unless it's abstract art, I feel that art is always about telling stories. And we love stories. We're so engaged by stories. So what are the different ways to tell a story? You can use words, but you can also use puppets or these fake people, or you can use instrumental music can tell a story, dance and movement can tell a story. And so for me, Luminato this year is very much about this idea of the art of storytelling and how we do that.
And I was listening to the Kelly and Ramya's show, and Ramya gave you a good review of you telling stories that you just did a couple weeks ago.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it's true.
You did 2 stories.
I did. So Ramya was in the audience. I'm very honored that she came. So this is one of the ways I've been exploring this idea, is telling a story to a room full of people versus writing a story or reading a story that you've written. And so storytelling, and I'm making air quotes, it's a thing. Like people get together for the purpose of telling stories, and it's not reading. You get blackballed if you sit up there and read. Like that's just not how it works. It's the idea that we get together with the intent to hear stories. I'm a longtime writer. I love writing. I like writing historical fiction. That's my favorite. And recently I've been really curious about the lives of blind people in history. And it's definitely true that music has been one of the few ways that a blind person could make a living and achieve some status in the public sphere, like be respected in the public sphere. I've started looking at blind musicians in history, and what I did was I wrote 2 stories based on the lives of actual people. Turlough O'Carolan, who was a harpist composer in the early 1700s in Ireland, and Maria Theresa von Paradis, who was an Austrian pianist and composer in the early 1800s in Vienna. And these 2 people were blind. They both achieved a great amount of success and renown in their world. So we know some things about them. And what I love to do is imagine around the edges, and the experience of being blind in a sighted world, that's just a common, like, there are some experiences that are going to be common no matter what your time and place is. There's some emotions and reactions and experiences that you're going to have as a blind person in a sighted world. So I wrote 2 stories about each of these people, but then I wrote gorgeously balanced sentences and these lovely rounded paragraphs with these amazing adjectives and lovely diction. And then when you sit in front of people to tell them this story, you can't memorize all of those rounded sentences and as though you're reading. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And when I first started trying to do storytelling, it took me about 30 seconds to realize, okay, I got to massively reevaluate my skill set here, because the way you tell a story to people is completely different from the way you wrote it. No matter how beautifully written it is, it's not going to work. So there's the way that you phrase things and that you speak and shape a sentence. There's also the way that you hold the attention of people when they're sitting in front of you. And this is something that you only get by doing it. And it's a matter of confidence and composure. And I really don't think I could have done this 20 years ago. I really think it's something that, for me anyway, I had to be sort of older and have more of a, I guess confidence is the right word, or just the ability to take a deep breath, just sit, be okay with a few seconds of silence, be confident that everyone's just waiting. They're just there for you. They're not going to start looking at their phones, or, to have the composure to sit with the silence and the pacing. And so the skills are really different. So I'm still very much at the beginning of honing these skills, but I got the golden opportunity to tell my stories at the Toronto International Storytelling Festival this year. And Ramya was in the audience, and I'm so happy that she came. Her and I are pals. I really, really like her a lot. It's an opportunity for me to learn some skills, but it's also an opportunity for listeners to hear some perspectives that they don't often get. It's sort of an intimate perspective on what it's like to be blind in a world of sighted people, while also sort of looking into the past to imagine what other people's lives might have been like who lived with some of the challenges that we live with every day.
A friend of mine, Mark Erickson, he's Native American or Indigenous. He was talking about storytelling, just to combine those two thoughts. He said that older members of their community, when they speak, the younger listen. There is this, I wouldn't call it seniority, but a respect for the elder, the wise, however they phrase it. He didn't really get into that part of it, but he said if they pause to gather their thoughts, no one interrupts. So if you give a pregnant pause in today's society, you'll get 6 people jumping in. That means I can talk now.
Yes.
So that art of storytelling is, I think, lost a little bit from today, the world I'm in a little bit. Yeah. But when you do get it, like around a campfire or someplace, I mean, that's how storytelling is, how history was passed on.
Yes, yes. And it's so much of it is about intent, obviously. When you said that, it made me realize that in my very early introductions to the storytelling community, I noticed that it's a lot of older people. And so there's a patience and an intention in storytelling. And when you go there, there's not going to be a lot of jumping around on stage or flashing lights or revealing costumes or anything like that. So you're there to listen. And maybe there's a way in which being a bit older is more conducive to that. Or maybe I do a disservice to young people when I say that, but it's all about intention when you're there to listen.
I think it's exposure to it and appreciating it, because we used to do show and tell in school, but it wasn't storytelling, or someone who was reading from a book, like you said. It's different than that. But storytelling, I always picture back to on the porch, or someone telling a story, or when I listened to my grandpa tell about how they used to have to go to the river and cut ice out, haul it back to put in the fridge type of freezer type of thing. I mean, those are so valuable to understanding. How can we say today we got it made if we don't have something to compare it to?
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. I think there's an interesting element on Zoom about this too. When there's group conversations on Zoom, it's kind of hideous. But one thing is we've had to learn a little patience, because we know that interrupting is just irritating to everyone. And so I've thought that a lot on Zoom, is I think like, okay, everyone's got to be a bit more patient. We got to take turns in a way that in a group we don't.
Yeah, you make a good point. I've seen a lot of people chat sometimes on Zoom, and there's rules. you have to say your name and someone has to call you, give you permission. I just don't like that. It just seems like you're reading a script or something, or, because Tom, blah, blah, blah. Jody, it gives me that impression, like it's so Captain May I or something like that.
Well,
Games like
but one
that.
of my favorite parts, though, is, and this is something I learned in meetings, partly because I've been in meetings with ASL interpreters and it's helpful for them. When you're finished speaking, you say end of thought. I found this is really helpful for people who don't quite know when to stop. If someone's a bit nervous, they'll talk and they'll start reiterating what they've said because they're a bit nervous. And it's kind of hard to know when to stop in a group where people aren't going to interrupt because it's Zoom. And so I've become a big fan of, even in person, I'll do this, especially if it's a difficult conversation where I know I'm nervous and I might be prone to ramble when really I am actually finished. So I'll finish what I have to say and then I'll just go end of thought and stop. And I love that. I find it so useful. And I've noticed when chatty people, when people who I know are prone to be a bit nervous, they'll use it. Great. You have an out. You have a way to let us know you finished speaking. And then you're learning also when you are finished speaking. So that bit of Zoom etiquette is something that I've actually carried into my non-Zoom life. Is okay, end of thought.
Yeah, it's a little better than drop the mic.
Oh, well, there's that too. I've never been, well, drop the mic is more like, done. Like it's emphatic, right? Where I think like I've said something important and I'm done. Whereas end of thought just means I've said what I need to say and now I'm finished speaking, because then you avoid that awkward silence of like, is she about to talk again? Can I speak now? So end of thought is a bit of Zoom etiquette that I think is really valuable.
What you all are doing up there with the Luminato Festival is more accessibility inclusion than I've ever seen in a festival. I've never seen behind the scenes that this much work goes into it, but you guys are setting, I got to think about that word. Your team up there is doing a wonderful thing about accessibility, making it available. 7 podcasts, audio only, so people can get deeper, more out of it, understand more of it, and 10 days of the Luminato Festival and audio description. That's awesome.
It is awesome. And it's our 3rd year doing it, which is extraordinary because I think each year we go a bit deeper and we get more reach, more audience. And so it's totally international. Like this stuff's all digital. It's all available through the web. So in the show notes, there'll be links for all of it. Yep. The 7 podcasts are some great setups, some excellent conversations, and then the live content. Yeah, I think you're right. I've never heard of anyone doing quite this level of engagement, and I'm really proud of it. And I'm so fortunate to be part of producing it.
Well, the engagement here, I was thinking, okay, this will be about a 20, 30-minute podcast. We'll just get the information out there. But as soon as you start talking about it, I had so many more questions. And that's what it's all about, is answering those questions that people have and giving them the opportunity to ask.
Yes. And, there was kind of a moment where we were talking about the production side and the lead sort of producer said, well, on this night, should we have an audio describer or should we not have an audio describer? And my take was, every time you can have an audio describer, you should have one, because there's always questions. And I think that audio description is something that most of us get, on our phones through apps and through TV and movies. But to have actual access to a describer where I can be the voice of my community and ask all of the questions that I want to know is golden. It's absolutely golden. So I'm like, yes, let's have a describer for sure.
Being the voice of your community, why don't you tell people where they can find you on Accessible Media Incorporated?
So on the 3rd Thursday of each month, I'm on AMI doing Curious Minds, which is a 15-minute segment at 3:15 Eastern, 3rd Thursday of each month. And that's kind of where I just get to chat about what I'm working on. So my segment this month will be on dance, unsurprisingly, because that's what I'm, so I've done segments on the labor movement and women's suffrage, just kind of whatever is interesting me at the moment. So I'll do some research, do a little presentation. So Curious Minds, that's where I can be found on AMI. And the Talk Description to Me website is still live. The episodes are still there as an archive. So talkdescriptiontome.com is mine and JJ's podcast. We're not producing at the moment, but all of our episodes are still there as archives. And then luminatotoronto.com. I'll put it in the show notes as well so everyone can find the Luminato podcast stuff in the month of June.
And how about the stuff that's out of this world, the stars?
Yeah, the Chandra Observatory is still engaged, JJ and I, to do image descriptions of some of the stuff that they post. And so I'm a consultant for that. We get 2 or 3 images a month where JJ will sort of write image description integrated with the science. And then I consult on, does this make sense? Could we word this better? Is there a way to make this more comprehensible? So those are on the Chandra website, which again, I'll include in the show notes. And there's a whole little web page just dedicated to these, so you can read them as text or you can listen to them as audio files. And there are sonifications for many of them as well, which means taking the data and instead of making it into a picture, you make it into sound. You take the data and map it to sound. So I've been lucky enough to be a consultant on some of those as well. It's pretty exciting. I got to present at the South by Southwest conference in Austin this year with the Chandra people on sonifications, and can't say too much more, but there may be more upcoming NASA description related content. Fingers crossed. Because, yeah, astronomy is still one of my passions.
Because they've just been able to record the largest explosion that they've ever seen in space.
Unbelievable stuff happening with the James Webb and research and the privatization of space. There's so much going on in astronomy and space exploration. So my mission is to make it as accessible as possible for our community as well, through image descriptions, through audio description, through sonification. So I'm a big advocate of that and working wherever I can wiggle in my perspectives to expand that content for the community.
It's always great having you on the podcast, and it just keeps going. We could go on and go diving into all this stuff. But
and we will, just another time.
All right.
Thank you so much. I love chatting with you. It's great.
Thanks, Christine. For more podcasts with the blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities, and download the free Blind Abilities app from the App Store and Google Play Store. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities. And if you want to leave some feedback, give us some suggestions, give us a call at 612-367-6093. We'd love to hear from you. A big shout out to Chi Chow for his beautiful music. You can follow Chi Chow on Twitter at LChichow. I want to thank you for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the reality
of blind ability. And the realities of blind abilities.